with Lisa from Been There, Got Out. And today's topic is about something uncomfortable but necessary. And it's also something that most of us deal with in our community, and that is aggression. And I'm not just talking about aggression with our exes, but I'm talking about kids who are aggressive. We have a lot of clients whose kids are physically violent toward them, who have broken their fingers, who've broken their noses, who've pushed their guest Davina Hehn, who I met a few months ago on her podcast called Shift Talking, is a behavioral analyst who has experience with and a lot of knowledge on aggression. And so I was really excited to be able to get her on here. Hopefully this will work, to talk about how to deal with kids and aggression and to protect ourselves and what we should and shouldn't do. But I don't know where she is. Oh, I'm not sure. Let me try it one more time, Davina. Let's get you on here. Okay. I think we both sent each other a request at the same time. But anyway, a lot of times parents who talk to us about this issue are really embarrassed and ashamed because they feel like they don't want to tell anyone that their kid is beating them up, especially if they're in an abusive relationship. So we're going to be talking about, again, aggressive kids, how to appropriately deal with it. And so, Davina, before you even officially introduce yourself, how common is it? Because people feel like it's just them. How common is it for kids to be aggressive during and post separation when there's a high conflict parent in the mix?
I think it would be surprising if they weren't, to be honest. Sometimes kids will internalize aggression toward themselves and kind of just shove down the turmoil and the chaos that's happening around them. And other times, if they aren't taught behavioral tools, if they just don't have the capacity to hold all of this in, that's when it comes out. So it's
Wow.
incredibly common, but there's so much stigma to violence. There's so much stigma to these types of things. And a lot of people don't even want the world to know about the conflict. So they tend to kind of keep it close to home and then feel that much more isolated and alone.
Yeah, so true. I mean, that's exactly what our clients in our community deal with is domestic violence itself is kept secret. So why wouldn't aggression, especially with kids, be kept secret as well? So now, Davina, how about you formally introduce yourself and tell us who you are and a little about your background?
Yeah, so I am a mental health coach. I'm a trained therapist turned mental health coach, just so I can be more action oriented. I'm certified in anger management, conflict resolution, and mediation. And now I work with everyone, really, but mainly families working with their kids to work through aggression, anger, and really regulate their nervous systems.
Great. Well, thank you for taking the time to be on today. What are some of the contributing factors to aggression? I mean, we see little kids slap each other all the time. If you see kids, little kids, like preschoolers acting violent, is that a sign that they're going to be violent teenagers and adults, or how does this even start?
Yeah, I mean, not to my knowledge. I think a lot of this is the fact that certain parts of our brain just aren't formed yet, the parts that are responsible for this regulation and the higher order thinking, executive functioning, right? And so when we see kids being at all aggressive, all that's really happening is they're trying to communicate and they
Hmm.
just don't have the skills and the tools to be able to do that. And that's usually how it presents. So what we want to work through are more techniques for them to express themselves, more ability to understand what it is that they're actually thinking and feeling internally, and turn off the autopilot that tends to kind of just be our baseline programming.
Yeah. So I know the person, I'm just writing something down so I remember to ask you. Someone that we were talking to earlier was saying, well, I don't know if this kind of behavior is just normal adolescent anger and aggression or if it's over the top. And in my head, I thought it's over the top, but I'm going to ask Davina
Yeah.
to tell us a little bit about red flags, or how do you know when it's abnormal or over the top?
Yeah, I think more so than anything, it's when it's affecting other people in a poor way, right? And for the most part, what we see is whenever we have adolescents, especially who are especially violent, especially aggressive, what we're learning is that they are also suffering as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so once it seems like they can't kind of like not bounce back as if it's something to let go of and not address, but if it feels like they're not quite capable of coming back to themselves and getting regulated in between, that's usually where we know that something's going on, that they're just living at this very high point within their day to day.
So can you give like a couple of examples of like what that looks like?
Yeah, so what we usually see are like fighting here and there, some physical aggression, some usually putting it into some sort of sport or activity or something like that because anger is energy and it's really just in motion. It's trying to get itself out of the body. And if we don't quite know how to harness it, how to listen to it, how to decipher what it's telling me, we're going to go too far out the other way. So what we'll see are some people who will maybe play a sport, get a bit too aggressive with it. They feel disenfranchised in some way. They feel like there was something unfair or unjust, and we see that come out pretty quickly. Where it starts to be concerning is where it's something relatively quote unquote small, and
Hmm.
then it's a much bigger reaction. And so what we typically say is that if it's hysterical, it's historical. So if they're
Mm.
having an inflated response to something that we don't quite think matches, right? Like the reaction doesn't quite match the stimulus, that's usually where we start to recognize that there's something else deeper going on.
Okay, so I'm immediately thinking of someone taking their teenager's phone away and the teenager punches them in the face, like a parent in the face.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, and when we really break that down, right, we have to see that from the kids' perspective, they're having some of their freedom taken away, their communication to the outside world. It
Hmm.
might feel like the punishment doesn't match the crime, and
Hmm.
there's an injustice there. There's so many layers to this, but really all we see is like all I did was take away his phone,
Yeah.
and then he hit me, and it's not quite that simple. It's a lot about what these things represent. And if there is a history of them feeling unheard, isolated from the outside world, miscommunicated with, if there's that injustice coming in, that's where that hysterical, historical thing comes in, and they're likely to kind of just boil over much more
Yeah, I
quickly.
love how you put that in perspective in terms of the themes because say a parent's point of view like you said would be like what's the big deal? I took their phone, but you acknowledge like the bigger issues. It's the phone, what it represents, communication to the outside world, a sense of agency, power, like the ability to have some freedom. And even though to us it might seem like what's it's nothing, to them it's like you're taking everything from me.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of this work, when we see kids go through any sort of therapy or anything, there's good outcomes, there's positive outcomes. When we see the parents also do the work, the outcomes are exponentially better because then we're all on the same page within the household. If just the child is sent off because they're the problem and
Mhm.
this kind of thing happens, they are going to attempt to implement strategies that the parents just aren't aware of, aren't open to, aren't equipped for, and that will actually make things a bit worse before they can even get better because we're
Mhm.
all just not on the same page.
Yeah, I mean that makes me think of um, dealing with a lot of our clients' cases, like all high conflict post separation. That one of the best kinds of therapy that's recommended is family systems, where it's not just working with the child, and like you said, it's not like the kid is the problem. It's that the whole family is a unit, even when they're separate. And so a therapist will deal with the different members of that family, whether it's the parents or other people's partners, to support the child. So the child is really the client, even if it's not just the child who's seeing the therapist.
Yeah, because well, the child is the product of this family system.
Hmm.
They
Yeah.
rarely ever learn anything outside of the familial norm. And even if aggression isn't part of the familial norm, whether it's physical, verbal, emotional, mental, there's also that part that if they aren't taught the tools of how to harness that energy and that aggression into more adaptive ways, it's likely to come out in the only way that we know how, which is to defend and protect, and that becomes aggression.
Yeah. So what are there any other like so I'm thinking one of the misconceptions is my kid is aggressive, so I'm going to send my kid to therapy because they're the problem. What are other
Yeah.
things that people might think or do that are not helpful to a situation involving a really aggressive kid?
Yeah, I think the well, one, that's I think one of the most massive ones. The secondary is kind of keeping them more isolated.
Mm-hmm.
because there's fear of how they will affect other people, whether other people will know and then talk about it and gossip about it and view them as bad parents, bad people, view their
Mm-hmm.
child as a bad kid. And more so than anything, what these kids are going to need is some sort of outlet, some sort of community where they can go and they don't feel like everything has to be so private, borderline secretive,
Mm-hmm.
and that keeping them away from others is what's going to be best. And given there are plenty of people who are more qualified than I am to talk about any sort of mental health disorders and things like that that might be coming through, what we tend to see most of all is that we're social creatures and we
Mm-hmm.
do need some sort of outlet. So what I would always recommend is if they aren't quite communicating with you well, like you and your kid were just at odds, it's not really working, introduce them and get them exposed to other adults who you trust and who you would want them to learn from,
Mm-hmm.
and basically create a bit of a mentorship for them in somebody else. We're biologically trained to not like our parents when we're teenagers, right? It's not like we leave the tribe and we don't
Right.
like
Right.
enmesh. So there's that part that if we give them people and mentorship and coaches and people to look up to learn about the social systems and expectations and these types of things from, in a way that might not even be as formal as therapy, where the spotlight is all on them. That's usually where I think a lot of us go wrong, is just keeping them quiet, away, locked away.
Yeah. I mean, I would think that, like sometimes I've heard therapists say, not necessarily with aggressive kids, but in general, when there's high conflict in the family, it's good for the kid to be away out of that situation. But what about when you have an aggressive kid and you say, I can't deal with him, I'm going to send him off to a camp or a boarding school or something like that? Do you think the kid who's sent away in circumstances like that feels like they're a bad person?
I can't imagine how they couldn't. I do
Mm-hmm.
think that we can still accomplish these same goals while sharing the intention in a different way. What I see most often are kids who are kind of just pawned around without being communicated with about what's happening and
Mm-hmm.
what the intention is. We give them the rules of the game and don't tell them the objective of why we're playing at all. So if that is
Yeah.
the case, versus what we tend to see is the parent saying, you are too much, I don't know how to handle you, you are the problem basically, so you're going to go somewhere else because I'm just ill equipped for this,
Mm-hmm.
versus sitting down and saying, there's something going on within us. I don't know how to handle this. I am ill equipped. I wish I knew better. I'm wanting to find a system that works for us so we can figure out a way to communicate together. And while you do this, I'm going to go do this
Mm-hmm.
so that we can learn these new strategies and techniques so that we can understand each other and move through it together. And I think if it's more collaborative and it's saying, you are not the problem, we have a problem. And I'm going to learn some skills to address it while you learn some skills to address it. And together we can be a really good team. And I think a lot of that tends to be in kind of just shipping them off and not telling them what's underneath it. And I also really do, of course, understand that there's a long history and anger that parents can have toward their kids, resentment toward them, a lot of these things of like the expectation not matching the reality of what they thought their life would look like.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
sometimes that's what the child carries. They're a walking embodiment of all of these times and all of these letdowns. So I do,
Yeah.
of course, understand that there are contributing factors, and we can't expect our teens, our kids, to out adult us. It's our responsibility to carry that burden.
Yeah. And I love the way you talk about it as more of a collaborative approach and saying to your child, like, we have a problem. It's not you have a problem. And that
Yeah.
we are going to have to figure out how to fix it. And you do these things, I'll do these things, but we need to fix it together
Mhm.
because we all care about it getting better.
Yeah. And for that child, like they are out of control. If they seem out of control externally, internally, they are absolutely even more out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And so just anything more that's going to tell them that you are chaotic, you cannot be understood, you are the problem, is going to reinforce those types of things. And then that's where we see them engaging in communities and with groups of kids that have a similar narrative and will accept them immediately. And then they kind of get into their own trouble and
Yeah.
reinforce their same tendencies.
Yeah. It makes sense. What about with little kids and timeouts?
Oh, so I am not a child development expert. I am not super confident. It worked for one of my kids. It did not at all for the other one. I'm not quite sure. What I do know, what and where we see this present in adulthood, is that when we are isolated to deal with our own emotions and also ill-equipped to deal with our own emotions, all that really encourages is the shoving down of those emotions.
Mm,
So what we usually see is, especially adults with an avoidant attachment style or a disorganized attachment style, what we usually see is that they had to deal with their own emotions on their own in isolation and
mhm,
were only allowed to come back when they were socially presentable.
mhm.
And that intention is good. I think the way that we go about it creates a poor impact.
Yeah, it makes me think about how if you behave a certain way, then you're fine to be around me and I love you. But when you start showing those negative emotions, then you need to be by yourself.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah. So
exactly.
you need to
It's the
be,
I love you, but I don't like you kind of thing of like, I love you, but I don't know how to handle your emotions. I don't know how to sit with your emotions while you are having big emotions. So you should just go away until they're small again so I can cope. And that's where
mm,
it's on us as the parents. It really is on us to be able to navigate this and be able to tolerate their emotions while they're experiencing them without feeling the need to control or reduce or minimize or extinct them entirely.
oh my gosh, this is so important. Okay, so what if there's a kid that is getting physically aggressive in the moment and like really harming another person? Like, is there a way to appropriately defend yourself and protect other people without getting hurt?
Yeah, well, the what in order to know what to do in that moment, we need to know what anger is and understand it on a deeper level. So if
Okay.
we know that anger triggers in the part of our brain that is just our fight or flight, it shuts down our rational thinking brain. And so in that moment, it's not that they are unwilling to listen to you, unwilling to calm down. They are physically incapable of doing so. And so
Yeah.
when we are recognizing, and this is true for us as adults as well, right? So in those moments, what we tend to do is we try to separate them and say, what are you thinking? What are you doing? And we try to appeal to the rational brain. That
Hmm.
brain's offline. It's called the amygdala hijack. It pulls all the blood from the frontal cortex, and we lose the ability to think clearly. And that's why afterward, once we come to, it's like, wow, what was I thinking? You weren't. Your body was doing it for you in an automatic kind of thing. And that part of our brain is not really great at understanding the difference between a perceived threat and an actual threat.
Hmm.
So that's where a lot of these things happen in prevention, of course. And of course, once we're at this point, prevention is not the option, right?
Yeah.
Reactivity is more so. It's understanding that in that moment, all we need to do is separate them. We need to get this person away from anyone else that's still actively triggering that response
Hmm.
and just focus on helping them get their nervous system regulated. The talks, the punishments, the all of those things, they can come later. In the meantime, though, we just need to get them back to baseline. We need to
Hmm.
we need to let that part of their brain calm down long enough that their frontal lobe can come back online and they can actually think clearly.
So are there things like I'm thinking about issues not related specifically to aggression, but dysregulation. Like I was talking to someone the other day, and she was saying that sometimes temperature can help with calming oneself down for other situations like returning from transitions or going to court. Is that something that might be able to be used to also get someone back to baseline? Like giving them
Yeah,
something really warm or cold to sort of like shock their system?
yeah, there's a lot of those strategies. A lot of them are more somatic techniques. And
Mm-hmm.
yes, we're really trying to pull, so that part of the brain that's activated, right? It's not worried about anything other than survival.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we want to do is kind of get them back into their body. So you can use things like cold compresses. You can put ice, literal ice in their palm on the back of their neck. You can have them utilize their five senses. You'll probably get eye rolls and like an unwillingness to do it. So it's
Yeah.
not going to be so simple. And through continuous coaching, we end up seeing a lot of this where they can eventually do that on their own. But
Mm-hmm.
we can do something with the five senses where you ask them to point out five things that they see, four things they can touch, these types of things. sour candy can be a good kind of jolt to the system to help you come back online.
Mm.
A rainbow walk where you walk and try to find different colors of the rainbow. It's really just utilizing more parts of your body and your brain other than the one part that's just triggered.
Wow. And I love that image, sour candy and rainbow. I mean, it sounds like rainbows and unicorns.
Yeah, so we don't want to go too toxic positivity by any means, but we do want to help, yeah, just bring them back into their bodies. And
Yeah.
yeah, rolled cold washcloth from the freezer in the back bin. Yeah.
Yeah. And just a quick thought on what's your opinion about calling the police? If my kid is out of control, what do you think if I call the police on them?
So while of course there are going to be times that that's necessary, what I would prefer to see are crisis hotlines and those types of things where they are trained. It's typically rather than being law enforcement that has some training, if at all, on
Mm-hmm.
mental health concerns, we would call a crisis like an on-call crisis. And they can come, they know the strategies. These are qualified mental health professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I would much prefer to see us if we need to utilize an outside source, which of course there's nothing wrong with that. It's really just about knowing which one. Because
Yeah.
if you call the police within that system, it's really just a punishment system. There's not really much hope for rehabilitation in these types of things. It's the timeout, basically. But if
Yeah.
we bring in qualified professionals who know what they're doing, who are there for this specific reason, that's usually going to lead to better outcomes.
I mean, I don't even know of a crisis hotline. Like, I think everyone assumes call the police, but what are some of what kinds of crisis hotlines would somebody think to look for or to think now? I better tuck this in my brain, not just the police.
Yeah. Yeah, I would prepare now. If you look up your state and you look up mobile mental health crisis, there will likely be multiple. And then you can just save that number over in the phone as crisis, as whatever kind of language you will think of in that moment, besides
Mhm.
just 911. And that way you are more prepared. Yeah. But yeah, if you just search mobile mental health crisis, mobile crisis centers, you'll find plenty.
Wow,
It's
that's
really state by
helpful.
state. I don't believe that there's a national hotline for that because it would be state specific based on
Mhm.
their licensure and all of that, but that's always a good place to start.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, because sometimes I've gotten information that the police can make things a lot worse, not just for the kid that's in the midst of this crisis, but when there's high conflict, divorce or separation, if one parent who's often like a target parent anyway calls the police, the other parent will weaponize it and say, see, that parent doesn't think you're safe. I can take care of you. Or they think you're a bad kid and that's why they call the police. So I'm going to take care of you and take you away from that other parent. And it just ends up being much, much worse.
Yeah, we see that happen constantly. The other underlying kind of narrative here is that I'm willing to put you at risk because
Mm,
I'm feeling it, right? And so when we know that police aren't called when things are going well, right? Like
yeah.
there's automatically that part that when we're talking about the part that stimulates when we're within a threat perceived or actual, nothing puts us more into that than red and blue flashing lights, right? And then this authority figure and these types of things, it's going to keep them more activated within that region as opposed
Mhm.
to this one trying to come online, which is where the mobile mental health comes into play. I would really like to see anyone who's in this type of situation just putting together a bit of a care team, right?
Mhm.
Like getting understanding within a therapist, maybe even a behavioral coach, somebody like that who can help us learn skills and tools together. As somebody that we call in case of an emergency. You ask that child, who do you trust? Who do you go to when things are going wrong? Get their permission to call them if things are happening and you need an intervention. And we give them more community, more resources, as opposed to a last ditch effort, which would be calling the police.
Yeah, and I love how also that seems more collaborative. And I'm thinking in terms of the parallels with domestic violence is putting together a safety plan. Like, what are we going
Mhm.
to do if when this happens, and letting the child know ahead of time to be part of that plan is like, if something like this happens, who would you feel comfortable talking to? They're going to be on the list of people to call.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's almost knowing what to expect when things explode.
Yeah. And because none of us really want to plan for the negative, right? We would rather just focus on the good, the positive, and then when things go poorly, we'll
Mhm.
figure it out then.
Right,
But
right,
this type
right.
of work, so many of these things can be actively prevented. If not, if the entire situation can't be prevented, it can at least be prevented from hitting that level within the intensity of it. So long as we're willing to sit down and say, hey, I know that we absolutely have our issues. We're working through this. We have to try something different. We want to see something different. And so we have to implement something new and different. So here's a strategy that we're thinking of. What do you think of this? And
Yeah.
yes, bringing it more where it's not just them centered when they're a mirror. Our kids are going to mirror our behaviors. And
Mhm.
there's nothing we dislike more than seeing that in a very raw form.
Yeah, I'm going to write that down too. That makes a lot of sense because it's very uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things that people also worry about is that it's a lost cause. My kid's already too old, when they're an adolescent. They've had this violent behavior since they was a child, and I feel like nothing can be done. What do you think of that?
I mean, that will be true for them if that's the reality that they create for themselves. If that's the narrative that they carry is that their child's a lost cause, they will manifest that becoming the case. I'm
Mhm.
a firm believer in behavior change. I wouldn't be in this line of work if I didn't believe it to be true until our dying day. And so what I hear from that is just a feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. And that just means that they haven't found the right resource yet. They
Mhm.
haven't found the right person or community to help them see these differences. And my husband is a walking embodiment of this type of thing. He was aggressive in all of his upbringing, in and out of therapy and these types of things. And now he's 4.5 years sober and anger management certified and really doing really good work. It just, once it stopped being villainized,
Mm.
once he stopped being perceived as the problem, that no one can help, that you are this one exception to the rule, to the societal rule, once they can see that somebody believes in them and that they can be given permission to believe in themselves and love themselves and like themselves and choose themselves, that's usually where we get to see a lot of change. So again, that's going to
Yeah.
come to the parents' narrative.
All right. So you're getting a question how to I think it's introduce this request to our 12-year-old therapist or care provider. I'm guessing the request is maybe like a safety plan, like we talked about, or like a crisis plan or crisis team.
Yeah, I would want people to not worry so much about making it cute, right? Like anyone who is trained really well is going to be able to decipher any of your messages and work together with you. So I think it's just this simple, right? Reach out to them and say, "Hey, I'm wanting to act more in prevention. I'm feeling a bit out of control. I do think that we're needing more skills, more tools. I could use somebody as well. What do you suggest that we do here?"
Hmm.
Quite frankly, just share it. The thing is, the therapist carries so much pressure and so much responsibility and so much expectation. And at the end of the day, they're just one person. And
Hmm.
so if that therapist thinks that no one else should be involved, I think that's a red flag to begin
Oh
with,
yeah,
right? Like
proprietary.
if
We
that's
say the same thing about attorneys with these cases. Like
yeah.
you're going to need a team. If someone's like, "No, I know best."
Yeah, and given it's they have good intention, it just means that there's likely a poor impact. And that can also be a really good way of weeding things out. If you introduce this to your child's therapist and that therapist is rigid and unwilling to keep an open mind about these things and work collaboratively to find creative solutions, that's also likely indicative of what type of approach they're getting in their own therapy. And we don't need therapists teaching kids more rigid thought processes. We need mental flexibility and these types of things to be encouraged.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So, Davina, are there any things in particular? I mean, I know like all of this, it's a huge issue, but like a
Yeah.
couple of tips for people who are listening to this and thinking, I think we have a problem. I'm going to talk to someone, but where do I start? Like if my kid doesn't have a therapist and I've never talked
Mhm.
to anyone on a crisis team, like where do I begin? Like what's some of the priorities?
I would start with you. If you model it, they will likely follow through. So if you're not sure who to find for your kid, find someone for you first.
That
Find
makes
someone
sense.
that makes sense for you, start learning these strategies. Of course, being certified in anger management, I strongly suggest finding somebody who is certified in anger management. A lot of therapists are equipped to deal with feelings and these types of things, of course. And anger is such a specific niche thing that the more specialized attention and information and skills and information we can get about that is usually what I'd recommend. So there's the National Anger Management Association. They have a list of providers on their website. That's where I would always recommend you start. And if you're not quite there yet, if for some reason insurance or finances or whatever are, getting in the way of that, where I'd always suggest is starting with trying to understand what's happening beneath your kids' behaviors.
Hmm.
If we were purely to just look at their behaviors as messages, what would they be saying? How could I decipher that in any way?
Yeah,
I have a
go
group
ahead.
coaching program. I have a
Mhm.
group coaching program called the Parental Shift, shifting more into just the shift. And it's all about nervous system regulation, coping skills, communication strategies, these types of things. It's fully within the coaching space. That's more psychoeducational and skills based. So
Mhm.
something like that, there's plenty of really good, great providers that offer similar things.
Yeah, when you were talking about seeing what's beneath, I think I told you when we first met that our current book is about when your ex turns the kids against you. And of course, there's lots of anger and hostility there. And
Mhm.
so we often talk about how kids who are very aggressive, that there's heartbreak underneath that hostility, that
Yeah.
they are really suffering.
Yeah, I mean, it's anger is a secondary emotion, so it's a protective emotion. And so the way that I describe it to my kids is like that's the armor. Our anger is our armor, and it's protecting the soft and squishy inside. So what
Mm.
is that protecting? If we could if we could try to listen to what they're saying instead of just how they're saying it,
Hmm.
what themes is it falling within? And yes, it will most likely be sadness, helplessness, and injustice, feeling out of control, not understanding themselves, feeling embarrassed, shameful, having likely those strategies too of the guilt versus the shame side. And the shame is going to say that the child is the problem. The guilt will say the child's not the problem, the behavior is. And
Hmm.
so if we can remedy the way that we're speaking to our kids about their problematic behaviors as opposed to them being a problematic person, those things will likely help us too.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so helpful. How can people find you?
I am everywhere as a study space. So that's my handle on all socials. Yeah, a study space, just trying to help you find some balance.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Davina. I'm really glad that we were able to make this work.
I
This is
know, same.
super
Thank you for having
helpful.
me. Pleasure.
All right, we'll stay in touch.
You too. Bye.
Bye.